my top 20 favorite EPs. Part 2. Part 2. That's all I gotta say. Edwin Canistraci here, and that's right, I'm counting down my top 20 favorite EPs, extended plays of all time. I was planning to do this all in one shot, but I got a little drunk, so I decided, as I sometimes do if you've watched some of my other videos, whenever you see a part 1 and part 2, usually that means Edwin got very drunk by the end of part 1. That's usually what that means. But alright, it's daytime now. That usually only happens at night, because at night, if I'm doing a video at night and I've been drinking for a few hours there. Whereas if I'm starting now, like in the afternoon, this is happy hour. Hey, this first beer of the day after a hard day of work, you know? So I ain't gonna be drunk until way later on, and by that point, this will all be done. So I'm gonna keep this shit together now. And I'm going to keep it tight. If you want to know, hey, if you're like, what the hell are you talking about? EP, extended play, what the hell? Well, I guess you didn't watch part 1. Go and watch part 1, because that's where I handle all that business. I'm not doing that again, all right? So I broke down what an EP is and all kinds of stuff about EPs there. And if you hear sirens in the background, don't worry. That's just Los Angeles, the city of angels. It's the fucking apocalypse. Doesn't mean because the apocalypse is happening that I can't count down the top 20 EPs. And we're doing the top 10. Top 10. That's right, 2 5s. Top 10. That's right, we're doing the top 10. You metalheads out there and you hard rock bros, you're going to really love my top 10, because unlike 11 through 20, this is going to be pretty much all metal and hard rock. There's only one indie rock band that does sneak in there. So there's a little bit of indie rock. But for the most part, it's heavy metal and hard rock. And let's just do it. Let's just jump into this shit, all right? No preamble. Let's do it. Rock and roll. Number 10. Doesn't get more metal than this. From 1985. It's their debut. Like I said in the other video, sometimes a band's debut is an EP, especially if they don't have a lot of money. And that's the case with these Jersey boys. That's right. Overkill. With their debut EP entitled Overkill. Hey. Not bad. Of course, inspired by Motorhead and their album and song Overkill. And they probably were like, hey, that'd be a cool name for a band. You know, it's such an awesome name for a song and album. Let's go full Overkill and call ourselves Overkill. So I can't fault them there, because if you know me, I love Motorhead, and Overkill's my favorite Motorhead album. Scientific fact. That's the best Motorhead album. But anyway, so Overkill. A lot of people don't even know about this EP. You gotta be kind of a hardcore Overkill fan to even know about it. However, I think if you even listen to Overkill, chances are you probably are a hardcore fan. They're kind of a band that you're either really into or, I think I heard of them once. So this was released in 1985, featured 4 tracks, 3 of which would end up on other albums. 2 of the songs, Rotten to the Core, and the title track, Overkill, were both featured on their 1985 album debut, Feel the Fire. Oh man, that album's awesome, Feel the Fire. I love it. And I am going to do an Overkill discography review maybe in the next month or 2. I want to do it. I'd like to represent Overkill, and I do own all their albums, and I feel like they'd be a great band to do a discography review. In truth, I've only been putting it off because they're so prolific and they've been around for so long that it's a really big discography. It's big. It's like Motorhead's. And so I've been kind of putting it off a little bit. It's like Pee Wee Herman when he keeps looking at the snakes, you know, when he goes into that burning pet shop in Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and he keeps seeing the snakes. He's like, it's not because I'm like, about Overkill, but it's just like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. They got like, I don't know, like over 30 albums. It's a lot. God damn it, guys. Don't be so productive. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to do an Overkill discography review because they are my favorite thrash metal band. There you go. You might not have known that. They are my favorite thrash metal band. I think they are the most consistent. They're awesome. When I was a young man, as a teenager, I couldn't really get into their stuff. But as I've gotten older and my taste has matured, and somehow my maturing taste has led me to like heavier, more metal shit than I liked even when I was younger. So I don't know how that worked out, but it worked out somehow. Maybe because when you get knocked around by life, you know, you get knocked around by life, you know, suddenly you start connecting with Overkill. You know, you're like, yeah, I get it. Anyway, so this EP, I love it. 3 of the songs are on subsequent albums, but these are different versions, and that's why I am counting this, even though it's only got 1 song that's not on a subsequent album. These are all different versions, and they're kind of different. Not only is the production much rawer, the raw production, but the songs are slower too. They're slower and they're kind of sluggish, and they're not as good. They're not as good. Like the Rotten to the Core and Overkill, especially Overkill, not nearly as good as the versions that are on Feel the Fire. But they're still, even though they're different, I like hearing these raw kind of grimy versions. It's almost something like watching an early '80s like underground slasher film, like something like the original Maniac. Like this has that vibe. It's just grimy. It sounds kind of wrong. Like right out of the gate with Bobby Blitz's laughter, his cackle at the beginning of Rotten to the Core. I mean, it was creepy, the Feel the Fire version, but this version's even creepier. There's just something deranged and demonic sounding about that laugh. It doesn't sound like a generic evil laugh. It just sounds like a fucked up laugh. And that kind of fits the vibe. It's just grimy. And the thing that really pushes us over the edge is there's this really awesome song entitled The Answer, which they never re-recorded it. This is the only way you can hear the song The Answer. And it's a straight up doom metal song. And this is interesting because Overkill wouldn't do a slower doom metal song until 1989's The Years of Decay's Skull Crusher. I love that song. I love that album. Sometimes I bounce between Horoscope and The Years of Decay as my favorite Overkill album these days. They're both awesome. Both fucking awesome. And that song, Skull Crusher, Playing with Spiders / Skull Crusher. Woo! Man, that song's awesome. It's doomy, and it's like the next step after Master of Reality. I fucking love that song. And The Answer, although not as awesome as that song, it's definitely like a foreshadowing. It's a foreshadowing of that side, you know, that they're gonna start experimenting with a little bit in the very late 80s and then even more so in the mid 90s, this doom metal side. So that's cool to hear a song like that because for the most part in the 80s they didn't do shit like that. So that's really cool. And just like I said, the overall vibe of this, it's metal. It's not as fast and thrashy as they'll get with Feel the Fire, but it's just grimy, straight up Jersey metal. That's what I'd call it, Jersey metal. And it's badass. I love it. If you love Overkill, definitely check it out. The way you get it, this was not even originally released on CD. I believe it was just like vinyl copies that people got underground. It eventually came out in the mid-90s. They combined this with another EP, an EP called Fuck You, which featured a cover of a punk song called Fuck You. In, I think it was 96. Let me look. I got my notes here. Yep, in 1996, they combined these 2 EPs. They combined the Fuck You EP, which had that punk rocks cover plus some live tracks, and they combined that with the Overkill EP, and they called it Fuck You and Then Some. And that was the release, Fuck You and Then Some. And that's what I got. I bought that CD, and doing what I do, some might call it OCD, I call it being cool and legit. I separated those 2, EPs, and so now I got like the original Fuck You EP. Plus, I think there was a couple extra live tracks, too, that the original didn't have. But I kept it on that because it all worked well together. And then I created the original Overkill EP, which is cool just to hear those 4 songs the way the band originally recorded it. Plus, the band themselves, they consider this their first album, even though it's not an album. So it's like recognizing. I'm recognizing what Overkill did back in the day when they were grimy and scrappy, and they self-produced this EP. And it's cool. And if you love Overkill, definitely check it out. That's number 10. Broke my top 10. Overkill with Overkill. Number 9. You guys should all know this one. One of my favorite bands. This band right here. AC/DC. Number 9. 74 Jalibreak. 74 Jalibreak. Wow. This might be the first EP I ever bought. I'm thinking about this. Edwin, going back through the mist of time. Let's see. Let me think. Yeah, thinking about it, I think this might have been the first EP I ever got. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure this was it. You know, I bet you it was a lot of people's first EP. And I had the CD. I got the CD, and I believe I got it via a Columbia House scam. So I was in junior high when I got really into AC/DC, and I did the Columbia House scam, and I started diving into them. You can listen to my AC/DC discography review to hear about all that. I got really into AC/DC, and this was part of that wave. I didn't even know the whole history of this. When I first got this, because this was before the internet, you got to understand. So all I knew was this is an AC/DC album called, an AC/DC EP called 74 Jailbreak, and that the band formed in 74, and that this was with their original singer, Bon Scott. So that's all I pretty much knew. So I just took it for granted that all these songs were from like 1974. You know, I just assumed this. Okay, I guess this is like the first shit they recorded, and I knew the copyright date. I could tell that it came out in 1984, but I just assumed this was like early shit that they recorded that didn't come out until, or maybe it was just released in Australia. I didn't know all the details. I didn't know. It was just fresh and cool, and I didn't give a shit. We didn't have all that. We weren't bogged down with all these facts back then. You know, too much information now. It's like that Duran Duran song, Too Much Information. You know, and that was back in the early 90s when we didn't even have half the information. God, I could only imagine what Duran Duran thinks now with so much more information now. Anyway, that digression aside, all I knew was these were old songs that I assumed were from 74 because it was called 74 Jailbreak, and I thought they were all awesome. They were awesome. Jailbreak, You Ain't Got a Hold on Me, Show Business, Soul Stripper. Oh man, always loved this song. So great. Precursor to Squealer, fucking awesome with that bass. Guitar lines, love that. And Baby Please Don't Go, which was a cover, but hell, I didn't even know it was a cover back then. I just thought it was an AC/DC song. First time I heard that song. And man, they were all great. They were all awesome, and I loved it. And it, you know, along with everything, every Bon Scott era AC/DC album, but also the Brian Johnson stuff. I mean, I loved it. You know, I played it all the time. It's the fucking 74 Jailbreak. You know, of course I did. And the first time I saw them live, I got very excited because, you know, we didn't have like setlist.com or whatever. I didn't know that by this point this was part of the set list, that Jailbreak was a centerpiece of the set list in this era, and it's when Angus did his striptease. I didn't know that. This was my first AC/DC concert. So when I went to my first AC/DC concert with the Razor's Edge tour, and they did this like 15-minute long Jailbreak where Angus did his striptease, man, I didn't even know Angus did a striptease. Like, this was total, like, naive Babe in the Woods shit. So, I was like, oh shit, they're playing Jailbreak, that old song from 74, you know? And then it was a big centerpiece, and oh man, it was great. It was great to discover all that, you know? And then it wasn't until years later that I found out that none of these songs were, at least they weren't released in 74. And that Jailbreak was from the 76 Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. I had no idea. Of course, years later, and when the internet happened, that's when I discovered the truth. The truth that 74 Jailbreak's a bit of a lie. But it's alright, it doesn't make it less awesome. But yeah, so Jailbreak is obviously the last track from the Aussie version of Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, 76. The other 4 tracks, they were recorded in 74. So the title's not a total lie. The other 4 tracks were all recorded in 74, but they weren't released in Australia until 1975 with their Australian debut, High Voltage, which is very different from the American and international version of High Voltage, which was essentially their second album, TNT, with 2 tracks from the Aussie High Voltage. And I go into more details about that with the AC/DC discography review. I'm not going to go into all that. Interesting note, Malcolm Young in the early days, he did a lot of lead work. It wasn't just Angus. They didn't like totally solidify their roles yet. So Malcolm actually did the solos. I heard about Soul Stripper. I knew for a while that he did the solos on Soul Stripper, but apparently he does some of the solos on Soul Stripper. I think they trade off. He apparently also does the solos on You Ain't Got a Hold on Me and Show Business. So 3 of these 5 songs, Malcolm Young does the solos. So that's cool. That's a little different. It was, you know, this was still when they were finding themselves and they didn't have their concrete roles yet. And I think Baby Please Don't Go is really important. That's actually, it was the first song on their Aussie debut, High Voltage. It comes in. Works great either way. It works great as a first song or a last song. It's kind of the only way it works. Baby Please Don't Go either has to be the first song or the last song. It works great in both ways. Plus, I think Baby Please Don't Go is the first time you hear finger tapping. It's before Van Halen's debut. This is 75. So in 1975, we hear Angus Young doing finger tapping in the guitar solo. So I think that's the first time. Anyway, so I love this. Now, why is this only 9? I mean, yeah, I broke my top 10, so obviously, I have a high opinion of it. But why only number 9, considering AC/DC is one of my favorite bands, and these songs are so awesome? Because in truth, I don't really listen to this anymore. It's not even in my music library in this format. Because the thing is, after backtracks came out and I started reading things on the internet, and I lived with this for a long time, I decided I'd rather hear the tracks as they were originally recorded. So I recreated, kind of like how I create my own EPs, I recreated the original Ozzy albums. If I feel like listening to Jailbreak, I'll listen to it as they originally intended it, as the ending of Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. And with the other 4 songs, I recreated the Ozzy High Voltage using this plus songs from Backtracks and from the Bonfire box set. So between Bonfire, Backtracks, and 74 Jailbreak, I was able to recreate the original High Voltage. And that's how I prefer to listen to these tracks. I like listening to them in that context, especially because throughout my teen years, in my early 20s, I never listened to this stuff in that format. So now it kind of makes it fresh again, So at least for the past 5 years or so, this is how I like listening to it. So I do have 74 Jailbreak. I do have the vinyl of it when they did those reissues. So I do, once in a while, I like to put on 74 Jailbreak, and spin the vinyl. It's cool. It's nostalgic, very nostalgic memories with this EP. So it's cool to listen to it that way. But whenever I listen to my music library, I don't really listen to it. This is kind of obsolete for me now. So that's the only reason why it's not in my top 5. But hell, just because of the quality of the songs alone, there was no way this couldn't break my top 10. So there you go. AC/DC, 74 Jailbreak, released in 1984. It was to honor their 10 years together. This was the 10th year anniversary. And that's why they released it in 84. And it's great. If you're an AC/DC fan, I'm sure you own it. And if not, you should definitely own it. And not only own it, you should probably try to recreate the original Ozzy albums because, hey, why not? Honor the band and how they originally recorded the music because that's how they intended it to be. So there you go. Number 8. All right, I said there was one indie rock band that found their way into my top 10. It makes sense, too, because they are the kings of EP. They're not only the kings of 90s indie rock, in my opinion. They are the kings of EP, and I'll explain why in a minute. Number 8, Pavement with Watery Domestic from 1992. Watery Domestic. Okay, so to you non-indie rock fans and people who don't know much about Pavement, let me just break them down a little bit to you. They are kind of considered the greatest indie rock band from the 90s, and I'll tell you, I think they were. I was a very big fan. I got into them in high school, and I remember playing their first album, Slanted and Enchanted, to all my friends. And most of my friends, pretty much all my friends, hated it. They were all like, I can't get into this. Why are you listening to this? And but I loved them. I immediately connected with their music. I heard them on a college rock radio station. I was still in high school, but I was listening to Princeton college rock. They used to play a lot at the Trocadero in Philadelphia, located 10th and Arch, right on the borderline of Chinatown. It was a great venue. I saw so many shows there back in the day. There was a lot of all-age shows, and they weren't expensive. You could go and see a great show for like $20. So I saw a lot of cool bands, a lot of, kind of across the board, all kinds, because I had very eclectic taste, so I saw a lot of different kinds of bands. And I saw Pavement supporting both the Wally's Alley and the Crooked Rain tour there. And they were amazing live. They had a lot of energy. They rock out a lot more live than they do on their albums, actually. Great, fun, energetic concerts and kind of wild. They always had a lot of sense of humor. They were really funny. And they're like that on their albums too. I guess I would say that they're most, if you know the band The Replacements, what the Replacements were in the 80s, Pavement was for the 90s. They were that band that the fans were really into, and we all thought that they were going to be a really big band, which I think a lot of people that were into The Replacements thought they were going to be a big band. But because they were just a little too slackery and a little too unkempt, and even though they wrote catchy songs, both bands had really catchy songs, there was something in their DNA that made them not that kind of band that was going to cross over, even though they came close. And Pavement came very close with their second album, Crooked Rain, with the single Cut Your Hair. That was a buzz clip on MTV, and it looked like they might make it. But then they never really did. They never really did. But, you know, in some ways, I think it kept them more legit. And now there's like a myth to Pavement, kind of like with the Replacements again, that they are kind of, they're very respected, you know? So what they didn't gain in mansions and MTV exposure, they got with, you know, legitimacy. Watery Domestic, one of the best EPs ever. For their first couple years, Pavement only released EPs. You know, that's why they're the king of EPs. Their first 3 releases were all EPs. So by the time they had their first album, they already had this big cult following, and they already had this reputation. And their EPs were all they had like cryptic lyrics and very cryptic, interesting artwork, and there was something a little mysterious about Pavement. And their original drummer, Gary Young, was a really eccentric, older hippie guy, and kind of was at odds with the younger band that were kind of like younger college guys. But there was something kind of cryptic and kind of mysterious about Pavement. You couldn't even tell, like when you saw pictures of them, you couldn't tell who the singer was. Like sometimes you look at a picture and you could see like who the singer is. Like he has a certain look. In Pavement, you couldn't tell because Steve Malkmus just looked like any dude. He looked like any college bro. Like, so you just couldn't tell. So that in a way added to the mystery of Pavement. Like, you know, whenever you saw a picture of them, they just looked like regular guys, like, you know, hanging around a college, just fucking around, you know? And that's kind of how their attitude was. But the music, Steve Malkmus was an amazing songwriter. Amazing. He was like the 90s Lou Reed, an amazing songwriter, and his lyrics were great, cryptic, kind of mysterious, better lyricist even than Lou Reed, in my opinion. I think he was a really amazing lyricist. At his best, you know, more Dylan-esque. I think Malkmus is one of the best lyricists of his generation, and he especially was in the 90s. He kind of went up his own ass a little bit after Pavement, and I'm not even so crazy about the last 2 Pavement albums. With me, it's about their first 3 albums and all their early EPs. And Pavement were really great at the art of the EP. All their EPs were like these weird little mini albums that would have little gem songs. Like they'd have a really catchy song, but there'd be all this distortion and weird stuff around it. And so a little like, almost like I say, the aesthetic of like the Beatles on the White Album, where you'd have a really catchy song, but then you'd have something like Wild Honey Pie. So it was this kind of juxtaposition between catchiness and weird gonzo shit. And I love that. I love when those two things are kind of like juxtaposed. And Pavement did that right even from their early EPs. And Watery Domestic is really interesting because to me, it's like the most accessible thing they ever did, and it's an EP. It's also very interesting because a lot of people say that Weezer, the band Weezer, sound like a streamlined, more mainstream Pavement. And they do, and especially when Weezer was breaking out in the mid-90s, all of us Pavement fans were like, oh, they just ripped off Pavement. You know, they sound like Pavement, but they got better videos. Pavement had the worst videos. Their videos sucked. Whereas Weezer had really good high concept videos. And their production was a little slicker, and you could hear why they would be a big band, bigger than Pavement. But the basic sound and attitude of Weezer totally came from Pavement. And the funny thing is, really from this. It's this EP where Pavement always sounded a little different on each of their releases. And Watery Domestic, which came out after their first album, and it was the last one to feature that eccentric drummer, Gary Young. It's the first one with their bassist, Mike Ibold. And I think that accounts for this change of sound, because Mike Ibold, who's a really cool dude, he's a bartender in New York and a really cool bassist, he plays with this thick, distorted bass. This is very similar to the sound Weezer would have subsequently. So you have Mike Ibold's like distorted bass lines, these thick, distorted bass lines, which I always love. You know, I'm a bassist and I love distorted bass. And then you would have these kind of jangy guitars over it. And then you'd have these kind of almost Beach Boys type kind of slacker California guy vocals, and then really catchy choruses with little bop-bops and doop-doops and things like that over this distorted bass. And that sounds like Weezer, right? Well, that's this. That's Watery Domestic. And the sound's all over here. And what's interesting is, it's like they could have continued this sound on their next album, and I feel like that's it. I guess they would have been Weezer. But they decided, even before Weezer existed, they decided they didn't want to do that, and they kind of changed their sound again. And that next album, which would be Crooked Rain, I would say is probably their second most accessible album. But they changed the sound a bit, and they didn't put that distorted bass front and center. These songs are almost like power pop. And the same thing you could say about Weezer. That Pavement was almost like a power pop band on this EP. And you listen to it and you go, wow, they sound like a band that's right about to record their big breakthrough album. And I guess they did end up recording their biggest album, Crooked Rain, but it didn't quite push them over. Anyway, and the tracks are Texas Never Whispers, which you heard at the beginning of this video. It starts off with like a weird sound effect sound. Again, this is kind of shit they used to always do on their EPs and albums. But then it goes into this distorted bass and you get into the groove and it becomes this really cool little indie power pop song with great guitar hooks and a really cool chorus and really cool cryptic lyrics. Front Wards is the second song, one of their best songs. I love it. So catchy, really memorable. Feed 'Em to the Lions, Linden is the third track, and Shoot the Singer, One Sick Verse, another amazing song. Again, a little like power pop. It's almost like Bliss. It's like a band just doing music, just making some catchy, cool songs with a little scrappiness and weirdness around the corners. And I love that, and it's one of the things I love about early Pavement. Funny thing, too, is on the Slant It and the Chant It Deluxe Edition that they released a couple years ago, they included this EP on it, a remastered version of the EP along with the album. But they also had like 3 other tracks from these sessions, and they were all in the same style with that distorted bass and kind of catchy vocals, and the songs weren't quite as good as these 4 songs. Like, I could hear why they didn't make the cut of the EP, but they were good enough to be like killer filler. Like, I almost, like, you listened to it and you were like, you kind of wondered why Watery Domestic wasn't just an album. Like, why wasn't this an album, and why didn't you try to get like Front Wards like on MTV with a good video, but that wasn't Pavement style, I guess. They just, I don't know. I felt like this should have been an album that maybe could have taken them to the next level. But regardless, it's one of the greatest EPs of all time. In my opinion, the second best thing Pavement ever did. I love it, and I prefer their EPs even to their albums, and I love their early albums, especially the first 3. But all their early EPs are great. And if you haven't listened to Pavement much, this is a great way to begin. Number 7, Alice in Chains, Sap, from 1992, Sap. I talked a bit about this back in the last video because I talked about Jar of Flies, and I mentioned how Jar of Flies was essentially Sap Part 2. Well, here we go. Yep, I love Jar of Flies. That's why I made my top 20. But obviously, I love Sap even more, which is why it made my top 10. I love Sap. First time I heard Jar of Flies, I think I liked it even better than Sap. And I think most people, because it has no excuses, and overall I think it's a little poppier, I think that album would probably hit you first. Sap is more of a grower. It's kind of subtle. It's beauty in some of the songs, especially that Got Me Wrong. They're catchy, but overall, this is like a mood piece, and it's a little more subtle and it's a little darker than Jar of Flies, which is why ultimately I think it's a little stronger. Although they're both great. I'm not knocking Jar of Flies, but man, Sap with Brother. Oh, God, Brother's such a great song. Such a great song. Comes in and the guitars, it's all acoustic. This is the lighter side, the more melodic side of Alice in Chains, but it's deep and dark. Like I said in the last video about Jar of Flies, it has kind of Planet Caravan, kind of trippy quality to the stuff, with little, bongos and acoustic guitars. And man, Jerry and Lane, they sound great. Their harmonies are great. And they got Ann Wilson, my girl Ann Wilson from Heart. Big Heart fan. Love Ann's voice. And she sings backing vocals on this song. And also I Am Inside, another track. So you got Brother, Got Me Wrong, Right Turn, I Am Inside, and Love Song. Those are the 5 tracks. Perfect EP. 5 tracks, under 30 minutes. Perfect EP. Got Me Wrong was a great song. That's probably the song that some people might know from the movie Clerks. That was featured in that. Really catchy, kind of acoustic, grungy song. Love it. Right Turn's great, which features Chris Cornell doing backing vocals. That's great. I Am Inside. Love Song's my least favorite track on it. It's when they do kind of this punky kind of jerk-off thing, but which sometimes bands, hell, Pavement did that shit all the time too. It's kind of like I said about the Beatles on the White Album, where they just throw in something kind of weird at the end. But you don't mind because it's just kind of it's an ending track. Especially when it's an ending track, I don't mind that, because it's like you have this 4 beautiful songs and then this dissonant note at the end, and it creates kind of a uneasiness and this a little bit of discord, and so it's like we're not letting off so easy, and so it's cool. I mean, it's not something I wouldn't listen to Love Song on its own, but as a ending coda to the album, it works. All these songs are great. It's one of my favorite Alice in Chains releases, my very favorite release of theirs is Dirt. I'm a Dirt guy, love Dirt. But Sap might be, I think Sap's my second favorite thing they ever did. I love Sap. It's a great EP, one of the greatest EPs ever, and you should own it. Number 6, Rat with Rat, 1983, Rat's debut. That's right, another band whose debut is an EP. And man, I love this. And this is another band where my favorite thing they ever did is an EP. This is it. This is my favorite thing Rat ever did. And I do dig me some Rat. I like a lot of the shit they did in the 80s. But this is my favorite thing Rat ever did. It's just so down and dirty. This ain't like the hair metal in the late 80s. And, I've talked a bit about this, especially you could check it out in my Docking video. I talk a little bit about the difference between like the late 80s hair metal and like the early 80s hair metal. The early 80s, I wouldn't even call it hair metal like in the early 80s. It was just grimy LA metal, just grimy LA metal. It was like more from the street. This is like early Motley Crue and Docking. It just had that vibe where it wasn't like, yeah, girls could get into it and some of the guys were good looking and it was all like, it was cock rock, it was sleazy and just about sex and drugs and rock and roll. But there was also something mean, and I guess early Guns N' Roses is like this too. There was something mean and from the streets about it. Just look at that cover. Like, that's sleazy street shit. This sounds the way that looks. I only really started to get into Rat in the past year because two people, Mick Watkins and Ian Wadley, two friends of mine, are really into fucking Rat. And so I was like, I should give Rat more of a chance. I had this EP and I had Out of the Cellar, but that was pretty much it. So, but recently I did the deep dive and I got a lot of their shit. And yeah, they were better than I was giving them credit for. They're a really good, solid act. And overall, I think they're more solid than Motley Crue and a lot of the acts. I put Dokken ahead of them, but I would put them ahead of Cinderella and Motley Crue and definitely all those fucking lame bands from the late 80s. I'm not a big fan of late 80s hair metal for the most part. But Rat, yeah, I really dig their shit. And at some point, I might do a Rat discography review because I do like them a lot. But I always like this. I picked up the vinyl version of this EP in a Hollywood used record store, which is like the perfect place to pick up an old Rat, album or EP. And immediately, I just love the grime and attitude. It's got a touch in its own American way, its own Los Angeles way. It feels a little new wave of British heavy metal. It's got that kind of attitude and swagger, and this is very raw. This is very different from their subsequent slicker albums. This is very raw. This is their most metal thing they ever did, which is another thing I really love about it. You got Sweet Cheater. Woo! That's a really great tune. And the second track is my very favorite Rat song, You Think You're Tough. Woo! You Think You're Tough. Man, this song is tough. Love the swagger. Stephen Percy's voice, real snarly and gritty. And the guitar tone, everything about it. Just the attitude, the way it just struts in tough. I love it. This is like everything that's great about early 80s sleazy LA metal. And it's what's totally lacking from like late 80s, too slick and light for the girls, like Bon Jovi bullshit. Like, you don't have this kind of attitude and swagger with that shit. And I love that song. And You Got It, Tell the World. That's a kick-ass song. And the original version of Back for More, which also is on their debut album, Out of the Cellar. And hey, both versions are great. I might like this version a little bit better because, I do lean towards the rawness sometimes, but both versions are great. This song's almost a little Zeppelin-esque in the beginning with the acoustic guitar and then build up and then it gets into the song. Love it. And it ends with a cover of Rufus Thomas's Walking the Dog. Now, this is a thing a lot of bands have done. Okay, so this is an early 60s R&B song, Walking the Dog, that the first band to cover this on their debut, and it was the last song, was the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones on their first album, the Rolling Stones' first album ends with Walking the Dog, a cover of Walking the Dog. And then Aerosmith did that again in the 70s with their debut. The first Aerosmith album ends with a cover of Walking the Dog. And then now in the early 80s, Rat ends their debut EP, with a cover of Walking the Dog. And it's funny because I feel like each cover is cover of the preceding cover. Rat, I'm pretty sure they're covering the Aerosmith version of Walking the Dog. Like, they seem like guys, like it's a generation thing, that the band that they'd be listening to would be Aerosmith. So they were like, Aerosmith ended their debut with Walking the Dog, so we're gonna do that. And then with Aerosmith, they were the generation before. So I feel like they're doing a cover of the Rolling Stones Walking the Dog. And they're thinking, hey, the Rolling Stones ended their first album with Walking the Dog, so we should do that. And then the Rolling Stones, a generation before Aerosmith, the Rolling Stones are ending their first album and they're just covering the original song. They're covering Rufus Thomas's song because that's what the Rolling Stones did, especially in the early days. They covered R&B songs, and made them what was kind of prototypical hard rock. So, in a sense, Walking the Dog, this is like a copy of a copy of a copy. But it still kicks ass. I would say my favorite version of the song is probably the Aerosmith version. But they're all great. It's a great song. It's a lot of fun. I like the Aerosmith version best, but this is great. This is probably my second favorite version. This is really good. It's got sexuality and grime, and I love the groove, and it's cool. I like this passing of the torch of Walking the Dog, ending these bands' debuts. And this whole thing's great. Two other pieces of trivia. In 1984, they apparently re-released this album after the success of their debut Out of the Cellar, which had their big hit Round and Round, which is actually still a hit to this day. Re-entered the charts this year. Or was that last year? I forget. It was last year or this year. Round and Round re-entered the charts because it was used in a commercial. That album, because it was successful, they went back and they re-released this EP, but they remixed it and gave it a glossier production, which was still pretty good and still a little grittier than Out of the Cellar, but not as gritty as and raw as the original vinyl EP, which, if you listen to that, which I have. So some people, that was the first way that they got this on CD, but even that's out of print. So that's out of print, and this vinyl's out of print. So unless you get it from like a used record bin somewhere, this is a hard record to get, but it's worth it. It's awesome. Just listen to a rip of it on YouTube at very least. It's worth it. It's my favorite Rat release. If you're wondering who the legs are there, those legs belong to not just anyone. It's Tawny Kitane's legs. That's right, Tawny Kitane, who's very famous from the Whitesnake videos. She was David Coverdale's girlfriend at the time, and she's on the Here I Go Again video. She's the chick on the car. She's also the lead actress in Bachelor Party, which is a really cool, fun, early Tom Hanks film. I think his best film. And that's cool. And at the time of this, she was Robin Crosby's girlfriend, which is why she's the legs on this EP. She's also the girl on the cover of Out of the Cellar. So there you go, Tawny Kitane. So if you dig Rat and you dig sleazy, fun cock rock and heavy metal, listen to this. Go to YouTube. Or buy it somehow. It's worth it. It's worth it. Rock and roll. Oh my God, we're entering the top 5. The top 5. My top 5 favorite EPs of all time, motherfucker. Okay, here we go. Number 5, Slayer. That's right. You had to know this was coming. Slayer, Haunting the Chapel. Haunting the Chapel, motherfucker. 1984. Woo! This almost wasn't an EP. I almost couldn't count this. When this was first released, the vinyl version of this only had 3 songs. Chemical Warfare, Captor of Sin, and Haunting the Chapel, the title track. It was just those 3 tracks. So that technically, if I'm being the hard ass that I've been being and not counting 3 song releases as EPs, this is really a single. But thankfully, that was only the first pressing. And subsequent releases and on CD, they've all included 4 songs because they tacked on Aggressive Perfector. So because of that, I'm counting it as an EP because goddamn it, I want this to be in there. So 4 tracks. Thank you, Aggressive Perfector. This song was first included in 1983's Metal Massacre 3, which was a compilation from Metal Blade. It was also available on some cassette and vinyl copies of Show No Mercy as well. But my version of Show No Mercy does not have it. But my version of Haunting the Chapel, which I got on CD many years ago, that does have it. And man, is this brutal shit. I love it. When I was very young, I couldn't get into Slayer. They were a little too heavy for me. I could go up like Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Motorhead. I kind of stopped at Slayer. Slayer was like, nah, that's too much for me. I can't do this. Some shit like Overkill. There's just some shit that was just too metal for me. Even a young headbanger like myself, it was just a little too metal for me. I respected it. I was like, hey, that's cool, but just not for me. But as I gotten older and I've been knocked around by life, I can really get behind this shit now. I actually prefer early Slayer to, most people say Rain and Blood, and although I do love that album, that's like not even, it like just breaks my top 5. My favorite Slayer release is Show No Mercy, their first album. And this is a close second, it's perfect because then my third favorite is Hell Awaits. So it's like, this is the perfect bridge between Show No Mercy and Hell Awaits. It has that kind of gonzo metal thing that Show No Mercy has. With this, still, like, I love my favorite song, and it's my favorite Slayer song on this, is the second track, Captor of Sin. Captor of Sin, it comes on, like, just hits, and like there's crazy frenzied guitar soloing on it, and they're like rocking out, and then it gets heavy, and I just love that shit. And there's like kind of, it's heavy and kind of loose and wild all at the same time. This is definitely heavier for these 3 songs. Chemical Warfare, Captor of Sin, Haunting Chapel. These 3 songs are all much heavier than the tracks on Show No Mercy. So it shows them getting thrashier and darker and heavier. So definitely setting up Hell Awaits, a really dark and heavy and thrashy album. So this is the transition. It's transitional EP. And if you love those early stuff and you love those 2 albums, then how could you not love this? It's the perfect bridge in the middle. And Chemical Warfare would become a concert staple, something they would always play. And it's great. It's one of the most brutal and awesome ass-kicking thrash songs ever. I love Haunting the Chapel. I'm glad they added this 4th track to it so I could count it on my list. And it's fucking Slayer, Haunting the Chapel. Turn it on, crank it up, and fucking rock out. Number 4. Guns N' Roses. Live, I don't know, how do you even pronounce this? Live cursing symbols, like when they don't want to show cursing, but they put all the different symbols like question marks and shit. Like a Suicide. That's how you pronounce it. I just pronounced it. So Live, blah, 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 Like a Suicide. 1986. You notice I actually have not been counting live EPs. I didn't want to count live EPs. I wanted all this to be studio EPs. But I can count this. You know why? Because it's not really live. It's a lie. That's right. This is why they included it later on Lies, because this is a lie. They are not. It's not a. They did not record this live. They ironically did not have the money to record it live. And what they did, this is what like Kiss did on Alive 2. They just went into a studio and then they just added the crowd noise later. They just added the crowd noise later. And this is something Ralph Vieira, my friend Ralph Vieira, says, and I totally agree with him. Nothing's better than a fake live album. That's right. I prefer fake live albums to real live albums for the most part because, hey, they get it all right. They're in the studio and they make everything punchier and heavier. Listen, you could go see them live and hear what they sound like really live, The idea of an album is to make it as good and awesome and ass-kicking as possible. So, if they're recreating the live experience in the studio, they're able to recreate the live experience in a more awesome way. You can never capture the feeling of seeing someone live while you're live, but what you can do is make it all sound better and more, in the pocket and just hit everything with more power. And so I don't care. I'm not a fucking purist. I mean, what is this? It's got to be a documentary? No, it's a fucking album. It's rock and roll. I just want it to sound as awesome as possible. And it just happened that when there was a lot of doctoring and studio trickery back in the 70s and early 80s, live albums were a lot better. That's all I know. So I prefer, and this is one of the great last live albums, even though it's an EP, in my opinion. And again, this is my favorite thing Guns N' Roses ever did. I guess maybe I'm an EP guy, because a lot of these bands, my favorite thing is an EP. That's right, I like this even better than Appetite for Destruction. And I love Appetite for Destruction. But I don't think they ever sound as ferocious and hungry and street and sleazy as they do on Live Like a Motherfucking Suicide. Reckless Life, Nice Boys, Move to the City, Mama Kin, cover of an Aerosmith song. And Nice Boys is a cover of a Rose Tattoo song. Rose Tattoo, great band. Great Aussie band. Their first album, their debut, it was produced by George Young and Harry Vanda, who you probably know from producing all the Bon Scott era albums with the exception of Highway to Hell. They produced all those AC/DC albums with Bon Scott, and they produced Rose Tattoo's debut. Nice Boys is from that. So hey, kudos to Guns N' Roses for picking something that most Americans wouldn't have known about Rose Tattoo if it wasn't for them. I didn't know about Rose Tattoo, before the internet and trying to find out who did Nice Boys. And as soon as they did, I got that Rose Tattoo debut, and I love that album. That's great. So thank you, Guns N' Roses. It's like Diamond Head, like Metallica hipped me to Diamond Head. I wouldn't have known Diamond Head, who they were, if it wasn't for Metallica. So a lot of times when these bands are going on to be bigger, they take things from these other bands. The fact that they even put a cover of a song on an album really does help that band. So, I think that's cool, and it's great, and it's cool that, they're not obvious choices for a cover. And Mama Kin, of course, that's great. This is a song about your fucking mother. Great cover. Not as great as the Aerosmith version, especially the Aerosmith version on live bootleg, I think is better than this. Guns N' Roses can't quite match the coked up sleaze of the real thing, which is Aerosmith in my opinion. But they come close. The two best songs from this EP are the two originals, co-written by Izzy Stradlin, great songwriter, very underrated and important part of Guns N' Roses, and why their early stuff kicked ass, and why they can't really even make albums anymore because they don't care about making albums. But hey, that's a whole thing. I don't want to get into it. But anyway, but Reckless Life, man, Reckless Life, that is so sleazy and fucking, I love it. I love that song. It just sounds like you can hear the sleaze and grit from the Sunset Strip. This is the Axl Rose who was living outside Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard. He was living outside on the streets of Sunset Boulevard. That's that guy, and he's angry. You can hear he's an angry, young, pissed off, fucking trashy young man. And it comes off so clearly on Reckless Life. And then Move to the City. This is the thing. No band could have done a song quite like this at that time period. This is very Aerosmith, very Stonesy. They even have fucking horns on it. People are surprised that they had horns on the Use Your Illusion album. So, well, they got fucking horns on the very first thing they did here. But this is much better than the stuff on Use Your Illusion. Because even though there's horns on it, it's just got that sleaze and that swagger, and Axl sings great. And I love Move to the City. It's got the attitude. I mean, this captures that feeling I love about early Aerosmith albums. It's great. These 4 songs, they're just in the pocket. They're hungry. They're street. And they never would be this hungry and street again. Even on Appetite for Destruction, as great as that is, they sound a little more professional and slick on that compared to this. This is the real gutter Guns N' Roses. It's gutter and roses. I love it. The way I heard this first was the way most people heard it first. In 1988, my brother had a copy of GNR Lies, and I swiped my older brother's copy of Appetite for Destruction. It's one of the things that got me into hard rock and heavy metal music back in 1988 when I was a wee lad. And GNR Lies, they did the same. And of course, I remember opening up GNR Lies and seeing that really cool inner sleeve, if you know what I'm talking about. Oh man, talk about a sexual awakening. Some sexy stuff in that inner sleeve. And I love GNR Lies, but GNR Lies was essentially 2 EPs combined. It was the Live Like a Suicide EP with a new EP that they had recorded of acoustic songs, 4 acoustic songs. And that's awesome. One in a Million, one of my favorite Guns N' Roses songs. I like the slow down version of You're Crazy. But we're not talking about GNR Lies, because that is technically an album. But you know what I did? Of course I did it. I separated the 2 on my music library. And that's how I like to listen to it, because they're 2 EPs. So I got GNR Lies as the 4 acoustic songs. I gave it the inner sleeve as the front cover. So, and then it's a great front cover to have. And then I made, Live Like a Suicide its own EP, because that's how they originally recorded it. That's how people locally in LA that wanted to hear that local band that they were into, that's how they heard it the first time, when they went into a local Hollywood record shop and they got the EP, or they went to a GNR show like at the Whiskey, and I'm sure they were selling the EPs at the door. Man, that's the fucking way to listen to it. And that's why I want to listen to my Live Like a Suicide. It's just a 4-song EP that some dirtbag hands me at the Whiskey, and I love it. And That's why it's number 4. Number 3, these guys again. Pavement. Perfect sound forever. Remember when I said Pavement were the kings of EPs? Well, they really were the kings of EP, and that's why they're here twice on my list, and they made 2 top 10s. So wow, this is my favorite thing Pavement ever did. So there you go. My 2 favorite things that Pavement ever did are both EPs. This they did, it's their 3rd EP, and they did it in 1991 before their debut album Slant It and Enchant It. So this is them they perfect the art of the EP on this release. You know, the first EP was good, the second EP was good, but then they created an EP masterpiece. Man, is this great. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely for me. There's a British band called The Fall that they took a lot from, but it's also a little Sonic Youth, it's a little Velvet Underground, and it's all kind of mixed together with a splash of National Lampoon. That got that vibe. There's something very anarchistic about it. You could hear that they have melodies and hooks that are kind of coming out of all this tomfoolery. And here are the tracks. A song called Heckler Spray, which comes out, it's just kind of distorted, fuzzy sound. And I'm a big fan of the sound of distortion. That's why, in addition to heavy metal and hard rock, I like bands like Sonic Youth and Pavement, and I like the Melvins, big Melvins fan. I like the sound of distortion, and feedback, and I like that. I just like something about it. I don't know why, but I have this side of me that just likes that sound. It's like twisted sounding metal, and this song's like that, and I just love that. And also early blues records are kind of like that, like early electric blues albums like Muddy Waters and stuff. I like when something sounds kind of jagged, and Heckler Spray is like that. It's just this kind of noisy thing. And then it goes into the second track From Now On, which is really catchy. When I said that they have kind of catchy harmonies and melodies, but still kind of laid back. It's like slacker melodies. They don't sound like they're trying that hard, but yet despite their slacker efforts, some catchiness comes through. They just can't help it. And that's when it's like something real, something that's coming from inside and it's not contrived. They can't help being catchy, even though they're trying to make an underground, noisy kind of punk EP. Then my very favorite Pavement song is the next one, Angel Carver Blues / Mellow Jazz Docent, which is essentially 2 tracks. It's this opener, which is this pounding, distorted. It sounds like a piano, but they distorted it, and it sounds like really hot, like in the mix. So it's like a distorted kind of piano pounding. And then it goes into this kind of moody, and I guess why they say mellow jazz, but it's kind of just moody kind of indie rock, and it just has a vibe to it. I love the vibe. There's something kind of dark and magical about it. And I love this song, always love this song. Drive-By Fader, some more cool noisiness. Debris Slide. Woo! One of my favorite Pavement songs. Really catchy. This is like rocker. This is almost like borderline power pop, but noisy and punky. And they got the little bop, 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 bus along, but it's that heavy, and I love this song. Kicks ass. One of my favorite Pavement songs. Home, a kind of Velvet Underground sounding, distorted kind of ballad that's got feedback, and it's kind of wistful, and it has nice mood. And then Krill Ved User, which is some more weird noisy shit at the end. And it's under 30 minutes, and it's just kind of a perfect little trip, It's kind of like a mini little noisy evil stepchild of the White Album, where it's kind of noisy and weird, but yet kind of catchy and wistful, done by a bunch of slacker college guys that don't, have a lot of money. And so that's kind of how I describe the vibe of all this. And with this cryptic album cover and cryptic lyrics, I didn't get into Pavement until the following year, 92, with the first album, Slant It and Enchant It, after I heard one of their songs on college radio. But I can only imagine how cool it must have been to be like in some record shop like in San Francisco or Berkeley or something, and you come upon this weird EP that says Perfect Sound Forever Pavement, and it has this weird cryptic artwork, and then you play it. That had to blow some people's minds. I love this. Eventually, the first 3 EPs were all compiled, and this is how I first heard these EPs, and it's how I listened to them for many years. They were all compiled in this 1993 release, this compilation called Westing by Musket and Sextant. Hard to say, hard to pronounce. Just fucking Pavement, guys. Always gotta be so clever. But anyway, it's pretty cool. It was a great compilation. Had their first 3 EPs and the original Summer Babe and the B-sides and that. And it was really the stuff I never realized. They just put all the songs in chronological order. And I didn't even realize that then. Again, this was like pre-internet. So when I was first hearing this shit, I didn't know that all my favorite shit was essentially Perfect Sound Forever, you know? I mean, I like the other shit too, but that was the sweet spot of this compilation. And then years later, with the internet and what have you, I learned about that. And so, of course, you know what I did. Yes, in my iTunes library, I separated, I took, the Westing by Musket and Sextant compilation, and I spread it all out to recreate these EPs. And that's when Perfect Sound Forever, that was really its time to shine. When I got it separate, and it was this awesome, perfect EP, man, I never looked back. From that point on, this always became my favorite Pavement release. Even more so than Watery Domestic, which is pretty awesome, and that's more accessible. I would recommend Watery Domestic for people who just are getting into Pavement. And maybe Crooked Rain. Those are good gateways to people getting into Pavement. This is a little more on the deep side of Pavement. You gotta be really into them to really get the genius of this. But I do think it's genius. I think it's the best thing they ever did. I think it's the greatest indie rock EP of all time. And there's only 2 EPs that I think are better. And we're going to get to them right now. Number 2, Mercyful Fate with Mercyful Fate. The Mercyful Fate EP, 1982. And this is another debut. I told you, a lot of bands, especially underground bands, their first albums are EPs. Technically, this is called Mercyful Fate. It's self-titled, like the Rat one, or Overkill. It's self-titled. But over the years, most people call this Nuns Have No Fun. So a lot of people call it Nuns Have No Fun. And even sometimes I call it Nuns Have No Fun. But that is not technically the title. Technically, it's just called Mercyful Fate, the Mercyful Fate EP. And it has 4 fucking awesome as all fuck tracks: A Corpse Without a Soul, Nuns Have No Fun, Doomed by the Living Dead, and Devil Eyes. Okay, so where to go with this Mercyful Fate? They're a Danish band. They're not part of the new wave of British heavy metal, although they are running parallel with that. Like, they're doing their shit while the new wave of British heavy metal is going on, and they're doing that shit in their own Danish way. For people who aren't too hip to Mercyful Fate, although I imagine most of the people watching my videos are, they're kind of like a more evil Judas Priest. Whenever Judas Priest gets kind of evil and demonic, picture it, they kept going in just that direction and got even more evil and demonic. That's essentially Mercyful Fate. And their lead vocalist, King Diamond, is kind of like Rob Halford if he sang even higher. And his vocals were even more piercing, and if the lyrics were more satanic. Then you might get an idea. And that might be too much for some people. Hell, when I was a kid, Judas Priest was like too much for me. So I definitely couldn't have handled Mercyful Fate. But just like I said about Slayer and Overkill, as I've gotten older, I get into this shit. I can get into some fucking Mercyful Fate now. I get into it big time, and I love it. It's just like, yeah, it's a fucked up world, and I want to hear screaming and wailing and fucking guitars and this dark. This is kind of tie for my favorite Mercyful Fate release. I don't know if I can say it's better than Melissa, their debut album. I love Melissa, but damn, I can't say Melissa's better either. So I don't know. It might be a cop-out, but I think it's a tie. This is a tie. Yeah, this and Melissa, they're equally awesome. A Corpse Without a Soul. Man, hey, you got a great guitar tone. I love the vibe. It sounds generally evil, but still kind of sleazy and fun at the same time. Especially, that's the one thing, they don't quite have that on their next 2 albums. This was all the original lineup. And the original lineup, was they only did 2 albums, Melissa, and then which was 1983, and then 84 with Don't Break the Oath. So Melissa and Don't Break the Oath were the only, that was the original Mercyful Fate lineup. And then King Diamond went off and did some solo albums, and then they had a reunion with a slightly different lineup a few years after that. But there was just something about the original Mercyful Fate that even though King Diamond and the reunited band did some cool shit, they can never quite capture, in my opinion, from what I've heard, what those this EP and their first two albums were like. There was just a magic, you know, it's like satanic lightning in a bottle. And I love early 80s metal, you know, I love the new wave British heavy metal, I love, you know, Priest and all this shit. And this is just like the id of everything I love. Like it just gets down to the id of the evil, the fun evil. And this is like I said, this is like sexy and fun at the same time. It's just like a whorehouse that explodes into a satanic orgy, just like as you can imagine from the EP cover there. But the first song, I want to read the lyrics. I printed out the lyrics here from A Corpse Without a Soul. Okay, so it kicks in, it's rocking, you know, it goes in crazy and rocking. It's got this great guitar tone and sound. And then you hear King Diamond just wailing away, even higher than fucking Rob Halford on Stained Class, you know, and Exciter, you know, he's like higher than that. And the lyrics are, listen, I'm a corpse without soul. Satan, he's taken his toll, and he took it out on me. So, hey, these are really cool lyrics. But the way he sings it, it's like, listen, I'm a corpse. I can't get that high. But the way he sings it, he's screaming and wailing. And like I love when he just goes, Satan, he's taken, Satan. Like the way he's screaming it, the way he's screaming like Satan. I always think it's cool when the name Satan is used. You know, not the devil. They go full on Satan. They go full satanic and say Satan. I always think that's cool. Anyway, when he screams Satan, it sounds like he's possessed. It sounds like he's having an exorcism. I don't know. When I hear it, it sounds like I picture King Diamond rolling around on the ground screaming Satan, like he's inside of him. It's intense. It's fucking intense. And somehow it's intense and dark and rocking and fun all at the same time. I don't know how they did it. It's magic. It's black magic. But my very favorite song is the second song, the one that people sometimes call this EP, Nuns Have No Fun. And man, sad. I'm sorry that the nuns don't have fun, because they should have fun, because it's fun listening to this track, and it comes in with that fucking groove. You got the drum beat, and then the dan, this groove, kind of like Judas Priest, this nice, deep, fucking gnarly groove. I love Nuns Have No Fun. I love the groove, and the other two tracks are great too. They're all fucking awesome. All four tracks are fucking awesome. And if you love metal, and if you haven't listened to this, but you liked how I describe it, then you gotta check this shit out. And look at that EP cover, man. Doesn't get more metal than this. This is fucking metal. Doesn't get more metal than this. And man, it's the real deal. Straight up, evil id, heavy metal. I love it. And you should love it too. And we're getting down to the end. Let me get all my papers aside. Oh, we're getting to it. So what's number one? If you're hip, and you kind of been paying attention, you notice something, a very big EP that I have not talked about, you might have an idea what number one is. And I was just talking about these guys. I did a video about them last week. And I mentioned then that this was one of my favorite things they ever did. Now, this is not my very favorite thing they've ever done, but I'd say it's my fourth favorite thing they've done. Their first three albums I would put before this, but that's it, just the first three albums. And I think it's their best production they've ever had. And, well, you want to know what I'm talking about, right? Oh, well, okay, here we go. Number one, As the Sun Is Going Down. And I'm never going to talk about the top 20 EPs ever again. It's wrapping up. This is it. Number one, The Sun Goes Down, and we're talking about number one. Here we go. Fucking Metallica. Number one, Metallica, the 598 EP, Garage Days, revisited from 1987. Of course this has to be number one. For God's sake, it has EP in the title. Doesn't get more EP than that. Fucking EP in the title. It's got the perfect amount of songs. Under 30 minutes. It's a little different from other shit they've done. It's something to keep the hardcore fans excited between albums. It checks every fucking EP box. It's the ultimate EP in my opinion. And that's why it had to be number one. Because it's the ultimate EP. Man, it's fucking great. And it's all covers. It's a cover EP, and Metallica did great covers. No doubt about it. And this is their greatest collection of covers ever. I always loved this. I had the CD of it back in the day, and it was always one of my favorite things Metallica ever did. Got the vinyl right here, vinyl copy. Sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. Sounds amazing on vinyl. You should check that out. Man, I love this thing. I was just cranking it earlier. If you hear some beeping in the background, that's just fucking life in the valley. There's always construction. There's always noise. Always noise. But you know what? That's kind of rock and roll. And I'm going to keep talking. Let's go through the tracks here. We got Helpless, Diamond Head. Their greatest Diamond Head cover. And they're always great at covering Diamond Head, but this is my favorite one. And you know what? I gotta say, I think it's even better than the original. And I love Diamond Head, and I love that Lightning to the Nations EP. Oh, wait a minute. No! Shit. Hold the phone. Is that technically an EP? It is, I think. Woo! No, it's not an EP. Woo! I didn't fuck up. That is a fucking album. In fact, it's fucking 40 minutes. I guess their songs are really long. That's why. Because there's only 7 songs on that. So I got a little worried there for a second. I was like thinking, hey, there's only 7 songs on that. Is that an EP? But no, but they're fucking 7 long songs. So, woo! I didn't fuck up. That would have been a massive fail. Because how could I not include Lightning to the Nations if... But it doesn't matter. That's an LP. All right, never mind. Never mind. Woo! We can all relax. We can all relax. All take our time. Take our time. Okay. But you know what? I feel like now I'm going to have to talk about that. So in the next coming weeks, I'm going to do a Diamond Head thing. It'll be my New Wave of British Heavy Metal Part 4. And I know I've been slacking off on that anyway. I was going to do Angel Witch next. Maybe I'll do Angel Witch next, but I'll do Diamond. I'll eventually do Diamond Head, even if I just do Lightning to the Nations. I mean, that's really the only thing they ever did anyway. I'm going to talk about Lightning to the Nations and why it's one of the most important metal albums of all time, and how Metallica took a lot from it. But to Metallica's credit, even though in their early days they used to cover Diamond Head songs and not tell people that they weren't their songs, because no one knew Diamond Head. They were an underground act from England. So when Metallica played in the early days in the clubs and they did a lot of Diamond Head songs, everyone just assumed that their songs were Diamond Head songs, and Metallica kind of let people think that until they started writing awesome songs on their own. And then, to their credit, at least eventually, they did credit Diamond Head, and even if they were biting from them heavily in the early days, them and also the group Holocaust, which we'll be talking about in a second. Eventually, I never would have listened to Diamond Head if it wasn't for Metallica, and I don't think most Americans, or even some people in Europe, would have ever listened to these bands if it wasn't for Metallica bringing attention to them. So in my opinion, if Metallica didn't bite from Diamond Head, in the long run, no one would have ever heard of Diamond Head otherwise. So so I think ultimately they did well by them. And man, Helpless, as much as I love that Diamond Head Helpless, and it fucking kicks ass, Metallica took it to another level. Man, I think it's the greatest Metallica cover of all time. It's awesome the way it comes in. You hear this EP. It has a lot of live chatter, which I love. A little like the Beatles' Let It Be, where you hear studio chatter and you hear them go, and then the fucking Lars hits with the drums, and those fucking Lars haters, listen to this. Listen to the 598 EP, motherfucker. You're going to hear that fucking Lars. He ain't missing a beat there. He fucking sounds awesome. And the drums, the guitar tone, this is their best production. It's funny that Metallica's best production is an EP. But to me, this is their best sounding production. And for people that didn't like that they couldn't hear Jason Newsted on Injustice for All, you hear him all over this motherfucker. His bass is very prominent. And it's great. It's his best bass playing ever on a Metallica album. I mean, we don't know. Maybe his bass playing was good on Injustice for All, but we wouldn't know. He sounds great here. This EP is the first thing they released after Cliff Burton's death. It was a good way to just kind of get in there with their new bassist and just knock out some songs that they loved and put it out there for the fans. So, like, here we are. We're still together, even after Cliff's tragic death. Another reason why it was called Garage Days Revisited was because, and I talked a little bit about this on the first part, the Creeping Death single, Creeping Death from Ride the Lightning, there was a single for it, and the B-side were 2 covers. It was another Diamond Head song, Am I Evil, and Blitzkrieg from the group Blitzkrieg, and they did those 2 covers, and they called that side, on that side B, it said Garage Days Revisited. They gave the 2 B-sides like its own little name, you know? Although technically, like I said, that's a single, not an EP. So that's why they called this Garage Days Revisited. After Helpless, which totally fucking kicks ass, we go into the Small Hours, which I think is the second greatest Metallica cover ever. And I don't know, maybe this is the best. You know what? Yeah, I think Helpless is my second favorite, and this is my favorite cover. Yeah, the fucking Small Hours, man, it comes in with that creepy little guitar line, and it kicks in with a hard, slow, grungy groove. If you watch my Metallica video, I said Harvester of Sorrow was a Sad But True before Sad But True. Well, this is the Harvester of Sorrow before Harvester of Sorrow. So really, they're getting that cool groove from a cover, the Small Hours, which you get from a Scottish band called Holocaust. Really great band, who I never would have heard of if Metallica didn't cover this song. And the funny thing is, this song, this is how niche and underground Metallica was getting. This song was only something they ever just played live. It was an original Holocaust song, but they played it live on this one live album, and that was the only time they ever did the song. So Lars and the boys were really digging deep to get this song, and man, is it a gem. The fact that they could find such an awesome song on such an obscure release, man, that is really, really impressive, you know? And it's really cool because this song is a gem. Even the original version is great. It's raw and it's catchy, and that chorus is so hooky. And you could totally hear how it influenced Metallica. But Metallica, they take it to a whole other level. I mean, hey, Holocaust never even did a studio version of this song. So this is the only studio version. They did actually years later after it caught on, but it wasn't as good. It wasn't as good as the original live version or this version. But man, Metallica, they took it to another level. And this song is a sonic masterpiece. A sonic masterpiece. The different tones of the guitars, the different shades, the way the guitar sounds when it comes in, those fucking drums. Again, this production is off the charts. It sounds so great, and it sounds so great on fucking vinyl too. It has such a groove, and then it gets really fast in the middle section, and man, and that chorus, this sounds like it could be a single. You know, and this people that said Metallica were jumping on the grunge bandwagon in the mid-90s. I'm like, man, just listen to this shit. Listen to the Small Hours. Listen to Harvester of Sorrow. Hell, I mean, I feel you can listen to Leper Messiah and The Thing That Should Not Be, and hear that Metallica, along with the thrash stuff, they could do a nice, sludgy, slow, menacing song. So I feel like, along with like the Melvins, Metallica did a lot to create the sound of grunge, I think. So if anything, I think they could have exploited it more, because they really kind of were one of the first bands that really had that kind of sound. Everyone like talks about them as pioneers in thrash metal, but I think they're across the board metal and rock pioneers that have inspired a lot of different kinds of music. And a lot of this could even be heard just in this one EP of cover songs, where Metallica takes these covers and they make them their own. And in most cases, they make them even better than the original. And you can definitely say that for Small Hours. And Helpless and Small Hours alone makes this my #1 favorite EP, because they are fucking awesome. Small Hours would be like, I don't know, it's like my second or third favorite Metallica songs, period. And it's a cover, but man, it's great. Then you got The Weight, cover of a Killing Joke song, not a kind of band that most thrash bands would cover. They do Crash Course and Brain Surgery, which Jason does some cool fretwork and good bass stuff there, kind of funky, but then it's like thrashing cool, from a very obscure band called Budgie, who they also covered. It was one of their popular B-sides from the mid-'80s. Bread Fan also came from that band, and that's a really cool song. And then they close it with their tribute to the Misfits, Last Caress / Green Hell, which is actually 2 different Misfits songs, and from 2 different phases of the Misfits. Like Last Caress is an early Misfits song that's a more punky, almost kind of Ramones side, where they were their songs were short and kind of catchy and fun. And Green Hell, from the Earth AD album, Green Hell is from when they got more hardcore. It was like kind of hardcore, kind of thrashy. You can hear the big influence that they had on Metallica and a lot of thrash bands with the Earth AD album, and Green Hell's from that. And they put these 2 things together, and it totally works. It totally works. You have the more punky, fun Last Caress going into the more brutal, hardcore Green Hell. and which has a great chant. Metallica, they play it even faster than the Misfits play it, and the Misfits played it pretty fast. And Metallica's like doing this, and just again, Lars haters, listen to what he's doing on Green Hell. Man, it just kicks ass. Both these songs are great, and I never listened to the Misfits until after this. It was this was the first time I heard a Misfits song, or two Misfits songs, was because of Metallica. And then, I think it was like a year or two after that, I got that first Misfits collection, which I loved. And, that's when I heard, actually Last Crest wasn't on that. That was on collection 2, but Green Hell was on collection 1. So that was the first time I heard the Misfits Green Hell. And I love that. I think this is the one scenario where I think I'd go with the Misfits versions. I'd rather hear the Misfits, those two songs from the Misfits, but this is still great. It's great own thing, and it's a great tribute to the Misfits. There is a coda after they do Last Crest and Green Hell. They do a little jokey coda. It's the intro to Iron Maiden's Run to the Hills. They play that for like a few measures, and they fade out on it. And it sounds kind of like they're making fun of Iron Maiden, but if you know your Lars and you know your Metallica, they're not. They love Iron Maiden. Lars, huge Iron Maiden fan, and they were a big influence on Metallica. So it's more of a just kind of loose and free kind of tip of the hat, a little tip of the hat to Iron Maiden. That's what it really is. It fits the spirit of the album to kind of end it. It begins with goofy humming, and it ends with them fucking around playing an Iron Maiden song. So it's a perfect way to end this perfect EP. Years later, in 1998, it was included in Garage Inc., and I talk about Garage Inc. on my Metallica video, so if you want to hear what I have to say about Garage Inc., watch my Metallica Rank 'Em All video. And then a few years, I think actually just it was in 2018. In 2018, they re-released it on its own, the way it should be on its own, and they remastered it, and it was a great remaster, and that's where the vinyl I have came from. And it sounds better than ever, and if you're a Metallica fan and you don't have this, man, you're dropping the ball. Get this. So there you go. My number one, Metallica, the 598 EP, Garage Days Revisited. And that's it. Whoop. We are out. I did it. I was worried there for a second when I thought I fucked up with the Diamond Head thing. But I didn't. That's an album, not an EP. So it's all cool. So I did it. The top 20 EPs. My top 20 EPs. And I never have to do this again. But it was fun. I hope you enjoy it. And hey, if some of the shit I've talked about and you haven't heard it and you think that sounds good, check out those EPs, man, because they're cool. Rock and roll.